interpretations of exactly what it looked like. What we are sure of, and what's most important for us today, is that it was made of concrete and that it had barrel vaults. What was a barrel vault? The barrel vault was a vault that was, again, made out of concrete, placed on a wall, and then had the vault was shaped like the side of a barrel, as you can see here, which is why it's called a barrel vault. Shaped like the side of a barrel, resting on walls down below. A fairly simple shape that could not have been made, or would be very difficult to make out of stone, but was easily able to be made out of concrete. And we see a series of those barrel vaults placed one next to another for the warehouse, for the Porticus Aemilia in Rome. It was placed, and actually I neglected to mention, Livy also tells us that the Porticus Aemilia had 4 tiers. It was tiered in 4 levels. And we see those 4 tiers here rising up ever so slightly along the slope of the Tiber River. This is a cross-section of what the inside of the Basilica Aemilia might have looked like. You see those great barrel vaults here. You see that the architect has been adventurous in the sense that he has not placed the barrel vaults on solid wall, as we saw in that diagram, but has opened those walls up, created piers and arches above those piers to create these arcades, which is quite ingenious and very smart, because what it does is enable there to be both axial movement through the building, but also lateral movement. You can walk not only along each barrel vault, but you can walk in between the piers, which is, as I said, creates much more open, a sense of much more openness and lateral as well as axial movement. The other thing that you see here are the back walls, where we can see just what we saw in that fragment of the building, the arched doorways as well as the arched windows in the back walls, which of course allow light into the structure. Lots of activity needed to happen here as things were moved in and out, and those who worked here needed to be able to see everything that they were doing. The view that you have on your monument list is this one. It's a restored view of what the Porticus Aemilia might have looked like in antiquity, and it's very helpful. It's a cutaway view which gives you most of the major features all in one place. You can see that it is indeed tiered. There are 4 tiers for the structure, that they move up slightly as they move up the slope of the hill. You can see the use of the barrel vaults. You can see the piers down below. You can see the flat roof that we seem to have, but as they rose up slightly along the slope of the hill, you can see that the designer has placed small curved slit windows on each tier to allow, again, additional light into the structure. And you can also see from this diagram that it was made of concrete and faced with opus imperfum work, these small irregular stones that we saw in the Temple of Vesta, also used as the facing material here. Here's one more restored view, which shows you roughly the same, the 4 tiers, the barrel vaults, the windows on the various tiers, and then most importantly these doorways and windows in the back, as well as the general space that was available inside this extraordinary building. I mentioned that while we'll look at a couple of buildings, several buildings in Rome, I also want to go out to some of the colonies that were founded by the Romans in the vicinity of Rome in the 2nd and 1st centuries BC, and where they began to build, as we saw, they began to plan towns, they began to put walls around those towns, they began to put temples in those towns, and they also began to put other structures, including warehouses and sanctuaries and the like. The ones that we're going to look at today, here again, Rome is at the star, and we're going to look at buildings in Terracina over here, in Tivoli, and also in Palestrina. And you can see the proximity of those to others we talked about last time, Norva and Coda and Fileri Novi, and so on and so forth. It's not surprising, again, to see the Romans turning to their environs as they make these earliest towns, and as they start to fill these towns to make them into the kind of mini Romes that they so desired. So we're going to look at a series of these of different dates and of considerable interest in terms of what they herald for the future of Roman architecture. The first that we're going to look at is a market hall at a place called Ferentino, and it dates to, I may have neglected to show you Ferentino on that map, but it's in with all the others there. Ferentino, around 100 BC, it dates to. And you can see that it's essentially one giant barrel vault, which was used as the market hall. You can see also that giant barrel vault, which is made of concrete, has opening off it on the sides a series of arch areas with also barrel vaulted on the inside. These were used as the market stalls inside this marketplace. You can also see, I believe, very well that the facing that is used for this concrete is open with airman work for the walls and for the vaults. And then what they've done to emphasize the location and the shape of the arches, they have used stone around those, also to give further solidity to this part of the building. They have used stone, and you can see it's a combination of nicely cut ashlar blocks down here, but also of the bourgeois blocks that we saw in the Polari Gate used over the arches. So this combination of both stone and opus quadratum, stone, and also of opus impertum used as the facing for this particular structure. What's significant about this building is that it looks forward to things that we're going to see later on develop in Roman architecture. Primarily, I showed you in the introductory lecture a glimpse of the markets of Trajan in Rome. And I remind you here of the great market hall of the markets of Trajan, which is even more sophisticated in its use of concrete because it has wood balls, as you can see. But this experimentation that we're going to see in the early 2nd century AD in Rome would not have been possible without the experimentation in concrete that took place in this very early stage in the 2nd century and in the 1st centuries BC. Much more interesting, in fact, is the building that I'd like to turn to now. And this is the so-called Sanctuary of Jupiter Anxur at Terracina. It dates, we believe, to 100 to 70 BC. And it is, like so many Roman buildings, spectacularly sited. I had mentioned this on several occasions. We looked at the medieval hill town of Cori, for example, where the Temple of Hercules was located at the very apex of the hill. The Romans had an incredible knack for choosing extraordinary locations on which to site their buildings, locations that made those buildings, that accentuated those buildings from a distance, but also gave those who went to the buildings amazing views out from those buildings. This is one of those examples, the Sanctuary of Jupiter Anxur at Terracina. The best view of this sanctuary is from the sea. You happen to be fortunate enough to be floating on a boat somewhere near Terracina. That's a beautiful place to float. You will see from a distance the great podium of the sanctuary of Jupiter Anxur. But you can also see it from the town, which is where we're situated here. We're standing in the town, a couple of decent pizzerias right in front of us, and we're looking up at the hill on which the sanctuary finds itself. Now, as you look up to that hill, all you can actually see is all that's actually up there now, which is the podium of the sanctuary. The temple is no longer there, although there's some evidence up there, some remains that give us a decent sense of what that temple looked like in antiquity. But the podium is extremely built, and you see it again magnificently sited at the top of that hill. This is a restored view of what the podium would have looked like, and you see what the podium does look like as we see it here. And as it would have supported the temple on top, and also a back columnar element over here that was roof, as you can see. If we look at this plan, this restored view, you see several things that are worth noting. One, that the temple itself is very much a traditional building, and one that is very much in the tradition indeed of the buildings of the temples that we've already discussed. This combination of Etruscan plan and of Greek elevation that we saw in so many of these. And again, there's enough evidence for us to be pretty sure that this is what it looked like. High podium, single staircase, emphasis on the facade, deep porch, freestanding columns in that porch, but columns that seem to have encircled the monument. So this combination of, and stone construction, we think, a combination, once again, of Etruscan and Greek elements for the temple. You'll probably notice that the temple is slightly skewed. The angle of the temple is skewed. It's not straight on with the podium, which is very unusual for the Romans. We'll see that the Romans were very interested in everything being exactly as it should be. Axial, symmetrical, both sides matching. It's very unusual for them to skew something like this. Why did they do it? It probably had something to do either with something that was already on the site, some other building that forced them to do this, or having something to do with the particular god who was honored here and the location or the way they wanted that to be in relationship to various elements of the rites, or east-west, or whatever. I mean, there was something that caused them to put this in the position that they did. And you can also see that it has this back colonnade behind it, covered colonnade behind it, but it isn't attached to it in any way, which is also unusual, as we'll see. The podium you see down here made up of a series of arcades, and you can see once again both axial and lateral access, because just as in the Porticus Aemilia, they have created smaller arcades in the side piers to allow this kind of axiality in the structure, or movement through the structure in more than one way. The podium is extremely well preserved, as you can see, and extremely impressive. It's an extraordinary practice. It is on the road between Rome and Naples, so that one is going from Rome down to Pompeii, this is the sort of thing one can stop and take a look at, and there's some other interesting things along the way as well. We see here the great podium as it looks today. It's made out of concrete. You can see both the large arcades and then these lateral ones that I mentioned before on the interior face of the piers. You can also see that they have used opus incertum facing here. These are regular stones, all bunched together to create an attractive appearance, although this was probably stuccoed in antiquity. And then they have used stone blocks to emphasize the juncture of each of these walls, but also to help give the building increased stability. So this combination of stone, well, it's all stone, but this combination of blocks of stone and the smaller opus incertum stones for the facing of the podium. And here's a wonderful view, I think, that shows you a panorama through a number of these lateral arches and gives you some sense of how carefully orchestrated this was by the architect who was responsible for this. It's never too early for me to emphasize that the Romans were very concerned with creating vistas and panoramas from one part of a building to another, from one part of a complex to another. And they never lost an opportunity to do that. So that as you stand and look through a series of these lateral arches, you can see how carefully arranged that was to pay attention not only to the way in which the arches, you can see them in a series, as you can see here, looking almost as if they're diminishing in size, although they aren't really. But also this idea of creating exciting visual experiences as you walk through something, not just to walk through it, but to see something that really amazes you and fascinates you. And that creation of vista and panorama, both panorama out onto the countryside from the hilltop, but also a panorama or vista through a building is something quintessentially Roman, and we'll see it turning up again and again and again as a major objective of Roman architecture. A view once again of the restored view of the sanctuary. The sanctuary had below it a underground passageway called a cryptoporticus. I put that word on the monument list for you. A cryptoporticus that was used essentially for storage. storage purposes for this sanctuary. And believe it or not, we actually have the Cryptoporticus still preserved, and we can look at it. And it's interesting because here, too, we see the architects using concrete construction, creating a barrel-vaulted corridor, in this case with windows on the end and then a few doorways and some split windows, all of them arched, as you can see here, to allow light into the structure. It was used, as I said, for storage purposes, and storage having to do with the cult, and so on and so forth. It's very important, we're going to look at a couple of other sanctuaries as well, to keep in mind that these sanctuaries were different than an individual temple in a forum inside an urban complex. They were meant to draw pilgrims from far and wide, which is one of the reasons that they were placed in such prominent positions on tops of mountains, so that you wouldn't hesitate if you were dropping by, if you were going by in your cart or whatever, and saw this from a distance, or coming by sea in a boat, seeing it from a distance, you would be drawn. It would be like a mecca that you would be drawn to. So these sanctuaries were meant to attract large numbers of people to them. So they needed to provide not just the temple itself, but other things. And they were like malls. They often included shopping areas, souvenir shops, shopping stores for local specialties and that kind of thing, in order to encourage people to visit. I'd like to turn to another, also very interesting sanctuary that was put up at around this time. This is the sanctuary of Hercules at Tivoli, and it was erected, we believe, sometime between 75 and 50 BC in Tivoli. It is an incredible place. It is not so different from the sanctuary of Jupiter Anxur in its general intentions, this whole idea of creating this mecca for religious activity, and also just a place that people would enjoy coming to and gathering together and for social interaction. We see a restored view of what it looked like in antiquity. It is similar to and different from the Jupiter Anxur sanctuary. Just like the Jupiter Anxur sanctuary, it rests on a tall and large podium. As you can see, the temple doesn't stand in isolation, but is raised up on this large podium. You can see that it has a temple in the center. This one completely, pushed up against the back wall and completely straight, so axial, and it created an axial relationship to the podium. The temple, we believe, was also one of these traditional types of temples with the tall podium with the staircase on one side, with columns going around at least three sides, deep porch, freestanding columns in that porch, raised up on its own podium, and then the larger podium down below. One of the features that we see here that we did not see in the Jupiter Anxur sanctuary is the use of the circular staircase here, which adds drama to the design. It's also on axis with the staircase of the temple itself, but it also serves as a kind of, it's shaped like a theater pavilion, seated here, the pavilion of a theater, it's shaped just like that, as you can see here. And we believe its purpose was not so much as a monumental entrance way or monumental staircase, although it served that purpose to a certain extent, but also as a place where people could gather and could sit and probably watch performances, religious performances perhaps, or perhaps other kinds of performances in front of this, in front of the temple of Hercules. And there may have been some kind of a stage building. There was a wall here, so there may have been also some kind of stage building in front of that semicircular seated area. This is another restored view showing you the same. You can perhaps see that theatrical area better here, again serving as a dramatic staircase, but at the same time as a place where performances could take place at this structure. But all the other features are apparent. And I want you to pay special attention to the fact that we have the temple pushed up against the back wall, not one of the short back walls, but, well, none of them are short here, but against the long back wall, as you can see, but pushed up against it, dominating the space in front of it. We're going to see, when we turn to Pompeii on Thursday, But the same idea of pushing a temple against the back wall is characteristic of forum design, the design of meeting in marketplaces, as it is for sanctuary design. The sanctuary of Hercules at Tivoli is preserved in part, and I can show you one very interesting detail, which is what you see now on the screen. We are looking at part let me go back for a second just to point this out. If you look at the back, if you look at along the sides and the back, you will see that there are columns above and then columns with arcades and columns in the first story, and then columns on their own in the upper story. So what I'm going to show you now is a section of the lower story of the Sanctuary of Hercules at Tivoli. And we can see that what we have here is a very important combination, and it's the first time we've seen this today, of arches with columns interspersed, columns placed, engaged or attached into the wall in between these arcades, as you can see here. The construction is concrete. The facing is a combination of stone, with block, the actual block, and the bourgeois above the arches, and opus incertum work for the walls, as you can see here. But this scheme of columns in between arcades, extremely important. This is setting in place the kind of scheme that we're going to see used for buildings like the Colosseum in Rome. So extremely important. There's one detail here, there's one detail about the columns, though, I wonder if anyone notices, that make them different than any other columns that we've seen thus far this term. Does anyone see what that is? They definitely don't, yes, good point. That wasn't the one I had in mind, but you're absolutely right, and it leads to another point I'm going to make in the not too distant future. They don't support anything. They are used here. The building is supported by the concrete construction. The columns don't have any support role whatsoever. They're there entirely for decorative purposes. So excellent point. And still one more. Look at the facing of the column. What does that tell you? What is it? What kind of facing? Opus incertum, which means what? The columns are made of concrete too. The columns are not made out of stone, but the columns in this instance, it's unusual, but the columns in this instance made out of concrete and also faced with opus incertum work. A view again of the complex, just to make the point that as at the Sanctuary of Jupiter Anxur at Terracina, there is an underground passageway, a cryptoporticus. But in this case, and you can see it's on the left, underneath the left side of the sanctuary. But in this instance, interestingly enough, this isn't just a storage area, it's actually a street. The ancient name for Tivoli was Tibur, T-I-B-U-R. There was a street called the Via Tiburtina that made its way from Rome to Tivoli, and this underground passageway was actually the street. The street ran underneath the sanctuary. That street, or that part of the street that ran under the sanctuary, can still be seen today. And you can see, it looks almost like, an underground subway or something like that. You can see barrel vaulted area with a series of niches over here, probably for shops, so that along the way you could stop and shop at beneath the sanctuary. So a street, in this case, that is part of the Via Tiburtina, leading from Rome to Tivoli. I'd like to turn now to a couple of buildings in Rome, back to Rome, to look at first a building called the Tabularium that dates to around 78 BC, that was a very important building in Rome because it was used to house the state archives at that particular juncture. It was put up by a man, we even know who put it up, a man by the name of Quintus Lutatius Catullus, and I put his name on the monument list for you. And it was located on the north side of the Forum, of the Roman Forum, and the south slope of the Capitoline Hill. And here I show you one of these excellent Google Earth flyover views of this part of ancient Rome, or what this part of ancient Rome looks like today. And we see the landmarks that we've already pointed out, the Colosseum at the very top, The Roman Forum lying in front of the Colosseum, Mussolini's Via dei Fori Imperiali, the Imperial Forum over here, Palatine Hill up here, there's Maximus here, the wedding cake, so-called, of Victor Emmanuel, the modern building, 19th century building over here, and then the Capitoline Hill, redesigned by Michelangelo, with the oval piazza. The tabularium is located right here. It is, again, facing the Forum, the Roman Forum, but it is the back wall of one of Michelangelo's palaces, the so-called senatorial palace, designed by Michelangelo. What Michelangelo did is what was done so often by later architects, incorporated, didn't tear down the early Roman tabularium, but incorporated its wall as the back wall of his senatorial palace. And that's exactly what it remains today. Here we see a view of the tabularium. We're standing on the Forum side, looking at what remains of the tabularium, and we can see some of the features that we've already been discussing today. First of all, let me point out that it is made out of concrete. It's made out of concrete, the building is concrete, but here in Rome, they decided not to use opus imperatum work was not the rage in Rome. Instead, they were much more interested in cut stone, and you can see that they have used cut stone in this structure, cut tufa stone. I think you can recognize the stone as tufa. Remember, tufa is indigenous to the city of Rome. Rome has a lot of fairly decent tufa. They've used tufa here, and they have used tufa work also for the arcades above and for the columns. The capitals are done in travertine, added in travertine, considered the most important part, so they use the more expensive material there. But you can see here, as at the Sanctuary of Hercules at Tivoli, that we have this combination of arcades and columns. And once again, as was already pointed out, columns that have no structural purpose whatsoever, columns that are there for pure decoration. And this scheme of arcades with columns is going to become extremely important in the future. One can go inside the tabularium today and see what remains of this state archives. There are some very interesting corridors and vaulting that one can see, and by the way, it's a nice place to go because there's also a panoramic window on which one can get some spectacular views down over the Roman Forum, and some great pictures as well, photographs as well. We're looking here at one of the corridors of the tabularium. You can see that the arches are made out of stone, supported by columns, but in between them there are a series of bays, as you can see here, and in between them we have domical ceilings that are made out of concrete. So concrete used here, combined, concrete for the domes, combined with stone. The Romans were very handsome stone that the Romans, those in Rome itself, favored, used for the arches and used to decorate walls as well. And what's interesting is that we find in these corridors a series of ramps and a series of steps. And there's actually one staircase that has 66 steps, 66 steps, as well as ramps. And what we see happening here, these are getting covered by barricades. What we see happening here is the Romans paying a lot of attention to varying the experience that you have when you walk through buildings. Sometimes you're going to be walking on a straight path, sometimes you're going to be walking on a ramp, sometimes you're going to be walking on stairs, to vary that experience. So, and you're going to see panoramas and so on along the way, to make it an experience to go into a building and to wander around that building. But we're also going to see, and I'll show you this particularly in the last structure we talked about today, we're also going to see the Romans not hesitating to be the controlling force that they very much were, and to establish certain predetermined paths that you have to take. So you're having a varied experience, but you're kind of having it in the way that the Romans want you to have it. And that's an interesting phenomenon that I hope we'll think about together as we converse in the online forum. I want to show you one last building in Rome today, before I show you the real pièce de résistance of concrete architecture of this early period. I'd like to show you one more building in Rome. It's a later building, and in some respects it belongs in a later lecture. It's the theater of Marcellus in Rome, a theater that was put up by Rome's first emperor, Augustus, after the death of his nephew and son-in-law, Marcellus. He seems to have put it up, that is, Augustus seems to put it up. He was in great grief at the loss of this young man because he had hoped that Marcellus would succeed him. Marcellus was married to Augustus's daughter, Julia. He hoped that Marcellus would succeed him, but Marcellus unfortunately died very young. Augustus was in incredible grief, and he put up this theater in Rome, the stone theater in Rome, in honor of Marcellus. The theater was put up, as I mentioned, either in 13 or in 11 BC. So I could talk about this. We had several lectures on Augustus, and I could talk about this in that lecture. But I decided to put it here because it really is the culmination, in a sense, of some of the experiments we've been talking about today, and I wanted you to see it in this context for that reason. We are looking at the theater of Marcellus as it looks today. Parts of it are extremely well preserved, as you can see, at least these first two tiers here. The main reason that the building has survived, and you can, well, I'll talk about the details in a moment. The main reason that the building has survived, and I believe I mentioned this in the introductory lecture, is that it was reused over time. It was reused as a fortress in the Middle Ages, it was used as a palace in the Renaissance, and it was used as, most recently, and it's still being used as a very luxurious condominium today. This is where Google Earth really comes in handy. You can go onto Google Earth because it's very difficult to get a sense of the way in which this ancient part of the structure relates to the rest of the structure today without going up above it. And by going up above it and looking at it both from above and Google Earth now allows you to do 3D at the same time. So you can do 3D and up above at the same time. You can see the relationship of this building to its modern locale. And by the way, it's just in the shadows, very close to the Capitoline Hill. It's a hop, skip, and a jump from the Capitoline Hill. This area of Rome is actually the so-called Jewish ghetto area of Rome. It served as a ghetto in times past, and it's still referred to it that way today, and it has some of the best restaurants in Rome. If you have never had artichoke alla Judea, Jewish artichokes, wow, they are incredible, and there are lots of restaurants in this area that has them. They're a real Roman treat, considered a very characteristic part of the cuisine of ancient Rome. It's definitely something to experience. But we see the theater of Marcellus right here, and you can see both the facade, which is the ancient part of it, but also the rest of the building in the way in which it is used today as a condominium with apartments opening off these lovely courtyards with trees and plants and flowers and all sorts of things there. And there's another famous temple, the Temple of Apollo, that is located right outside. There are only 3 columns preserved of that temple, but also a podium right in front of the theater of Marcellus. This is, again, Google Earth. You can look not only at what the building looks like today, but you can recreate now, in these last couple of months, they've enabled us to recreate ancient Rome as well, and one can do that for all of the buildings that we'll be looking at this semester. And this one is their recreation. It's fairly simple, but their recreation of the theater of Marcellus. And it allows us to look at some of the features of that building. Again, sorry that I have to talk about so much about terminology at the beginning, but as I mentioned, once we get through this, the first couple of weeks, we won't have to do much of that anymore. But the basic components of a Roman theater were the seating, which is called the cavea, C-A-V-E-A, which is the semicircular seating that you see here. The cavea is usually divided into a series of wedge-shaped sections, which you cannot see here, but I'll show you in another view in a moment. Wedge-shaped sections that are called, each are called the cuneus, C-U-N-E-U-S, cuneus, and then there is a stage building. We're seeing the back of that here, the stage building facing the seating, called a scaenae frons, S-C-A-E-N-A-E, F-R-O-N-S, a scaenae frons. What's important to us here in the context of this lecture is that while the Greeks built their theaters, and Greek theaters were the main prototype for Roman theaters, while the Greeks built their theaters on hillsides, the Roman Romans were not content as a civilization that was interested primarily in urban centers. The Romans were not content to build their theaters on hills. They didn't want to be constrained by having to build their theaters where hills happened to be. And so now, with concrete construction, what they were able to do instead was to build a hill out of concrete anywhere they wanted to build a hill out of concrete, right in the center of downtown Rome, and then hollow that concrete out in order to create the entrances and exits from that structure, and that's exactly what they did for the theater of Marcellus. If we look at this detail of the outside of the theater of Marcellus, we will see that this building made out of concrete is like the others we've talked about today, faced with some kind of stone. In this case, the stone is travertine. The decision of Augustus was to get this more expensive stone, bring it from Tivoli, and use it for this structure. Blocks of stone, ashlar blocks of stone, as you can see here, and interspersing among the arcades, columns. Columns, as were well pointed out before, have no structural purpose whatsoever. Columns that serve only as decoration, and the fact that they were decoration is apparent in the fact that they have varied orders. You see the Doric order used for the first story, and the Ionic order used for the second story. And we think there may have been a third story. Today, what you see up there is part of the later construction. But if there was a third story, whether that had columns or pilasters, if you remember, black columns, if it had those were probably of the Corinthian order, because that is exactly the scheme that we see on the later Colosseum: Doric, Ionic, and ultimately Corinthian. But we're sure at least of the Doric and of the Ionic. So these columns have no structural purpose whatsoever, purely decorative. In a sense, they're kind of the icing on the cake. They don't hold up the building, but they decorate it in a very nice way. And it shows you that the Romans are beginning to use what the Greeks used as structural components of their buildings, namely columns, to hold up walls, to hold up roofs. They are using them for purely decorative purposes, playing around with their original purpose and using them in a different way. And we see that happening in spades here. If you go into the building, you will see the corridors of the theater of Marcellus. You will see what first looks like a barrel vault done out of concrete construction, resting on stone, on travertine piers. But you see that barrel vault curves. A curving barrel vault is technically called an annular vault, A-N-N-U-L-A-R. You see an annular vault here, a diagram of an annular vault here. It's essentially, again, a barrel vault that curves. We sometimes refer to it as a ring vault because of its shape. So you see those annular vaults used in the theater of Marcellus. These are the same vaults that will be used ultimately in the Colosseum. A quick view of a typical Roman theater, the theater of Marcellus in Rome, and a typical Greek theater. This is the famous theater at Epidaurus of the mid-4th century BC in Greece. And I just wanted to point out the main differences. They look superficially alike in that both of them have an orchestra, they have an area of seats, they have a stage building, but there are some important differences. One is, and you can't see that over here, that the Greek theater has a round orchestra. The Roman theater always has a semicircular orchestra. Both of them have seats, a cavea. Here you can see these wedge-shaped sections of seats called the cuneus that both Greek theaters and also Roman theaters have. Both of them have stage buildings, although the stage building is more prominent in the Roman context. But the most important distinction is the one I've already drawn, and that is, as you can see it at the doors, the Greeks build their theaters on hilltops. You can see the trees and part of the hill very clearly here. The Romans build theirs on hills made out of concrete. Not always. There are some exceptions to that. We do have some Roman theaters built on hills, and the hill happened to be in a good location and particularly beautifully sited. But for the most part, Romans built them on their own concrete construction. I've mentioned the monument of Victor Emmanuel, the Vittoriano, and I just wanted to say a couple more words about it because, and you'll see how it fits into the context here in a moment, because it's a 19th century building. And it's a building that was put up to honor the first king of the Kingdom of Italy, his was Victor Emmanuel I, Victor Emmanuel I. It was put up in 1885, and you see it here, it's a major landmark in the city. This is a Google Earth image once again. But the reason I show it to you in this context today is that it is, in a sense, terraced on the slope of the Capitol Hill in the Philadelphia over Southwest. It's terraced on the slope, a series of levels, staircases leading to terraces, leading to other terraces, leading to the top of the building, decorated with statuary. It's a real experience to climb up it. It's an amazing place to go. It has the tomb of the Italian unknown soldier here, and with guards and eternal flame and all of those things. And I must add, for any of you who have not been in Rome in the last year and who are hoping to go sometime soon or whenever in the future, they have just added on top of the Victor. It was always a great place to climb up and see great views of Rome, but they have just added an elevator, modern elevator that they created, that you can now taking even higher than you were ever able to go before. The views of Rome from there are among the most spectacular that one can see in the city. So I happened, unfortunately, when I was there this past June, it was raining. It doesn't rain in Rome that often at that time of year, but it was. So many of the pictures that I took, you can see sort of gray background and so on and so forth. But nonetheless, it's some of the most spectacular views you can see in the city. So don't miss out on that opportunity. But I show it to you in this context because of all of this terracing up a hill. The idea for this kind of thing goes way back to the 2nd century BC and comes from buildings like this one. This is without any question the masterpiece of Roman concrete architecture, concrete construction, sanctuary design in the 2nd and 1st centuries BC. We're not absolutely sure of its date. For a long time, this is, by the way, the sanctuary of Fortuna Primigenia at a town called Palestrina. The date is very controversial. There are many who long associated it with the Roman general Sulla and said that it dated to 80 BC. There are others who have contended that it's much earlier than that. It dates to the 2nd century BC. And if it dates to the 2nd century BC, it's even more amazing because that means it comes at the beginning rather than at the end of this 2nd and 1st century BC development. I tend now, I've gone back and forth. I was a Sullen building for quite a while. Now I've been teaching the last few years for the 2nd century building. It probably doesn't matter all that much. It dates to one or the other, and it's an example of what was going on at that particular time. But I'm giving you a date this year as 2nd century BC, which I think at this juncture is probably, my personal opinion is that's probably where it belongs. You're looking at it here. It is an incredible, it is part of an incredible hill town, just like Cori, the city of Palestrina. It's a beautiful hill town. You can see it here with all the wonderful red roofs of the town that tie the design of the town together. The culminating monument of that town is still the sanctuary of Fortuna Primigenia. Once again, the Romans have found a spectacular locale for the sanctuary, home theater, home shopping mall, mecca for Romans of its day on this hillside. They have, once again, they have in fact taken over the entire hillside. They've terraced the hillside as we can see, and they've essentially poured concrete on that hillside to create a system of ramps and stairways and with a temple at the very apex. It is pretty well preserved today. You can see there's an awful lot of it still there. You can either, if you're coming by car, you can either park down here or up there, and you can make your way up the ramps, up the staircase to the various levels, and then up to the theatrical entranceway into the uppermost part. The temple of Fortuna herself, which was at the apex and was located probably in what may have been a kind of mountain outpost at that particular time, was transformed in the 17th century by the famous Barberini family and this Italian family. The popes came from that family and so on. Transformed into, they were very smart too, transformed into a nice little palace that they could go and stay in when they felt like it. A small palace, but one that takes the exact shape of that uppermost part of the sanctuary. I'll show that to you in a moment. Here's a view from Google Earth. You can see Google Earth doesn't always work. When you go out to some of the smaller places, it's hard to zero in on it well enough to get a decent focus But you can see it actually here. You can go to Palace and see it on Google Earth. This is, these are the various tiers with the palace at the uppermost part. Here's a restored view. It's on your monument list that gives you a sense of what the building looked like in antiquity. You can see the entranceway was down here, a small arched entranceway, but you really needed to go up the ramp, so to go up on either side. So we see this composite, just like we saw at the top of the this combination of ramps and staircases to make your way up. Varied experiences, but at the same time a predetermined path. Because while you had some choice when you first arrived, you could go up the ramp on either left and right, and you can see it was a covered ramp in antiquity. But when you got here, you had one choice. You had to go up the stairway to this level, and then there were some shops where you could explore, but then if you wanted to go up to the next level, you had to go back to the central stairway, up to this level, back to the central stairway, and then to the stairway in the shape of a theater at the uppermost part. So again, experiences stressed, your experience of the building was stressed, but at the same time your path was determined by the Roman designer. This is another view of the same, where we can see the entranceway, the ramps, the staircase leading you from one to the other, the uppermost staircase leading to the theatrical, the way in which the theater, the semicircular theater, is used both as an attractive entrance stairway to the structure, but at the same time as a place where performances could actually take place. Then what's called a hemicycle. We see several hemicycles here, Hemicycle. These curved areas, the columns follow that curve. You see that hemicycle at the very top, and then at the ultimate, at the apex of the structure, the shrine of Fortuna herself, a small round shrine. In fact, it's almost an anticlimax to see how small the shrine at the uppermost part of the structure is. How did the Romans achieve this? They created, as you can see here, a series, or they converted the hillside into a series of man-made terraces. They built those terraces up in some instances by barrel vaults. You can see the series of concrete barrel vaults here, as they had built some elements up along the way. And the ultimate result was what you see here. The same sort of thing you saw before, the ramps, the staircase, the hemicycles with columns supporting a curved wall, a series of shops, the spectacular the theater-like staircase, the curved hemicycle at the uppermost part, and then peaking up at the top, the temple of Fortuna herself. It's hard to conjure up in a classroom in New Haven the actual experience that one has when one goes to Palestrina and climbs through this structure, and is not as well preserved today as it once was, obviously, in antiquity. But in the few minutes that remain, I want to try to recapture, or try to take you through that experience, where obviously, and to show you how arduous it actually was. It's a climb up there. In fact, this is one of those examples, and there are many in Italy, that one likes to call stairmasters made by nature, essentially. I mean, places that you can go and you could have exerted a lot of effort into making your way to the top of this sanctuary. The best natural stairmaster in Italy is, of course, well, any of you have been along the Amalfi Coast. There's nowhere on the Amalfi Coast that you don't have to climb up and down like multiple times a day. And that's exactly what's happening here. And you can see how steep this path up the ramp was. And we're going up the ramp again. It's covered in antiquity. It's open to the sky today. As we go along the ramp, we see the remnants of some of the capitals. These are travertine capitals, as you can see here, falling down. But if you look at some of these capitals in detail, you see something quite extraordinary, and that is the capital isn't straight. The uppermost part of the capital slopes. Now, why is that? The reason that is because if you're going to put columns along the inner wall of the ramp, which is what they did, the capitals have to conform to the incline of the ramp, and so they have slanted those capitals. The whole idea, though, of changing, the Greeks would never do something like that. I mean, it would be sacrilege to change the shape of a capital. But this Roman architect has done that with abandon. He needed to, because he needed to fit it. So he slanted them. This sacrilegious approach to traditional Roman architecture, to traditional Greek and Etruscan architecture, the willingness to change things, to experiment. This is a change, we believe in. The willingness to change these things, to experiment with them in ways that have never been done before, to go against the tenets of traditional ancient architecture, namely out of the Greeks and Etruscans, is something quintessentially Roman and something that we see happening here, and again heralds a very innovative future. Here we see again the ramp, we see the capitals, the slant of the capital, and we see that the work here was done with concrete faced with opus and ceratum, both for the walls and also for the ceilings. As one makes one's way up the ramp, we see these alcoves, all of this done, the various shops, the alcoves, all of it done with concrete faced with opus and ceratum. We see the remains of the hemicycles. You can see the columns made of tufa with travertine capitals supporting this curved attic of the hemicycles. We see the vaulting with its concrete construction. This is an annular vault once again, where we can see the facing is, in the coffers, is opus and ceratum work. Another view of that, both the wall and the annular vault decorated with opus and ceratum work. A detail of that opus and ceratum work to show you how very attractive it was. It's a pity that it was stuccoed over in ancient Roman times. A view that I took again just to give you a sense of how steep the climb is. You've made it up the ramp. Now you're at that central staircase. You're on your way up. It's very, very steep. The stairways are pretty narrow, short, so that it's a very arduous trip up, as I said, and you can get a sense of the fact that you would have seen the sanctuary of Fortuna at the top. Now you see the embracing arms of the Barberini Palace, but you can see those arms follow the exact shape of the original hemicycle that was once there. And you can also see the theater staircase, very well preserved, and I show you a detail of that theater staircase leading into the doorway into the museum today. And just in closing, a return to the restored view of the structure itself with the sanctuary of, with the temple or the shrine of Fortuna at the very apex, a shrine that unfortunately no longer survives. But I think as you look at this last view of this monument, you can see that what the architects have created through this terracing, through pouring concrete on this spectacular hillside, is a kind of a pyramid with the goddess at the apex, a pyramid that I would contend was more extraordinary than what the Romans did with concrete than what nature itself has provided in the form of this mountain. And it gives you an incredible sense of what the Romans were capable of doing in the 2nd and 1st centuries BC, vis-a-vis concrete architecture, experiments that again are going to have a lasting impact on the architecture that we'll be studying in the course of this term. Thank you. Last time we talked about a number of monuments that were connected to one another geographically and also chronologically, and were also made out of the same material, concrete, faced with opus and ceratum. I remind you of 3 of those today, of the sanctuary of Jupiter Anxur at Terracina, of the sanctuary of Hercules Victor at Tivoli in the center, and then on the right, the sanctuary of Fortuna Primigenia at Palestrina. We're going to do something entirely different today. We're going to look at a single city, one city, in all its aspects. Its public and private architecture, its civic, commercial, and religious buildings. We can't do this sort of thing very often because too few Roman cities are either well preserved enough or well excavated enough to allow such an overview. But this is no ordinary city. This is a very special city. The city we will be concentrating on today is Pompeii. Pompeii was located in an area of Italy called Campania. It was located near Naples. It was located near the Mediterranean Sea. It was a small resort town in the late 1st century BC and into the first century AD. And you can see it on this map here, and it's right here. You can see that this area of Campania is obviously south of Rome. It is along, again, the Mediterranean Sea. And you can see Pompeii here also with its sister city of Herculaneum and some of the other well-known cities from this area, Boscoriale, Oplontis, for example, and Naples itself, ancient Neapolis. And you can see this cluster of these cities that make up Campania. This was an area, the town itself, again, was a small resort town. It was a town that obviously had its own population of people who made their money largely from commerce because they were located so close to the sea. But it was also a spot that was highly favored by the glitterati of Rome, who used to come down to this area of Rome, not only to go to Pompeii itself, but to establish villas, to build villas in the vicinity of Pompeii. And we have imperial villas at places like Oplontis and at a place called Bosco Trecase that is located here as well. And along what is now the Amalfi Coast and on the island of Capri. So this was a town, again, that was noticed and was visited even by the most elite in the city of Rome, in Rome itself, in the center, in the capital city of Rome itself. But what's very important for us from the outset is to recognize that although Pompeii, as we know it today, was essentially a Roman city, it had a history that was much longer than that went back much further than that. And I'd like to go over some of the major highlights of the history of Pompeii because they will situate us and will help us to understand the city's architecture. The history of Pompeii, as I noted, is much longer than the history of Roman Pompeii. It goes back as far as Rome itself. It goes back to the 8th century BC, the same Iron Age period when Romulus was founding the city of Rome. Pompeii goes back that far as well. It was first overseen by an Italic tribe called the Oscans, but the Oscans were soon taken over by an even more powerful tribe called the Samnites. And the Samnites are, in fact, extremely important for the city of Pompeii and for the architecture that we'll review today. The Samnite period in Pompeii lasted from the 4th through the 3rd and even into the 2nd centuries BC, up to 80 BC, because it was in 89 that Pompeii fell to Rome. We talked about Rome colonizing this particular part of Italy, not only the area right around it, but the area south of it. And Pompeii fell to Rome in an important military campaign in 89 BC. And in 80 BC, Sulla made Pompeii a Roman colony. What happened thereafter was the Samnites, who had built homes for themselves in public buildings that we'll study here, the Samnites were essentially thrown out of their homes. Their property was confiscated, and that property was given instead to the Roman veterans. We talked about the fact that that was the way the Romans operated. They paid back their veterans for loyal service by giving them land, and they usually gave them land of those that they had conquered. So that happens here as well. Samnite property confiscated, and the Roman veterans settle in their homes and begin to redo them, settle into using their public buildings to remake them in the Roman image. The next century and a half saw the construction of Pompeii's most famous buildings. But we should not forget, and we'll concentrate in part on that today, that some of these buildings had their genesis under the Samnites. During this period, there was a very high civilization in Pompeii. There was trade with Greek cities, and especially with the Greek city of Neapolis, Neapolis being the ancient name for Naples, The next very important year in the history of Pompeii was the year AD 62, when the city of Pompeii was literally shaken to its foundations by a very significant earthquake. A very significant earthquake indeed. And to give you some sense of that earthquake, I show you a frieze that encircles a shrine that was located in the house, or that was commissioned for the house, as a decoration and as a place to place the household gods that the owner and his family worshiped. The shrine had a frieze around it. The man himself, by the way, was named Lucius Caecilius Jucundus, and we're very lucky to remember his name, but Lucius Caecilius Jucundus. And Jucundus, fortunately, we have a portrait preserved of Jucundus, so we can get a good sense of what he looked like, literally warts and all, because you can see that he had a huge wart on the lower left side of his face, and he was willing to have himself memorialized. And here we are sitting and looking at him today in this classroom in New Haven, as he really was, with this large wart on the lower left side of his face. But a wonderful portrait of Jucundus, the owner of this particular house, who was obviously so struck and probably so affected in his own life by the earthquake that he decided to have a relief commission that would depict the event of 62 AD. And you see what is happening here. You can see, in fact, the great temple of Jupiter, the Capitolium of Pompeii, which we'll talk about today, literally collapsing. And you can see that in front of that temple were two tall bases with equestrian statues honoring important people of the city. Those look also like they are shaking in their boots, so to speak, and about to fall over. If you look down here, you see the city wall, and note your ashlar masonry, your opus quadratum, and the use of headers and stretchers in this wall, the wall of the city of Pompeii. But you can see the gate is not doing too well. It is also seems to be tottering and about to fall down. So this is a graphic depiction of what happened then, and it gives you some sense of the significance of this for the people of Pompeii. Now, at the end of this, like in so many natural disasters, obviously these people loved living where they did, beautiful part of the world, and they essentially stood up and dusted themselves off and began to remake their city, to restore their city to what it was. And we have, from this point on, from 62 on, almost immediately, 17 years of frenzied building activity in which the Pompeians tried to bring their city back from the dead, so to speak, and to bring it back to what it had once been. But you know the punchline here, you know the end of the story, you know that all of this work, all of this 17 years of hard work was all for naught, because on that fateful day of August 24th in 79 AD, the long dormant volcano of Vesuvius, which you see looming up behind the Temple of Jupiter in Pompeii today, the long dormant volcano of Vesuvius erupted, covering the city of Pompeii and all of its sister cities in a mass of, or in a blanket of ash and lava. Covering it forever? Well, not quite forever, almost forever. Because as you also know, the city was rediscovered in the 18th century. And when it was rediscovered, what happened there first was a period of treasure hunting. Well-to-do individuals, primarily from Europe, made a beeline for Pompeii once it was rediscovered and began to build their own personal collections of art from what lay around. They took jewelry, they took metal items, precious metal items. They even did the unspeakable by cutting portrait paintings and other paintings out of the walls and taking them back to decorate their own houses and doors in other parts of the world. That went on for a while, but fortunately not too long. The archaeologists gained the upper hand, and we begin to see not long after that a period of scientific excavation. And I show you two images here which show that scientific excavation, which shows some of the houses of Pompeii being revealed by archaeologists. And of course, it was all of the good work that they had done, and work continues apace at Pompeii. Excavation still goes on in parts of the city that have allowed most of the city, as far as we can tell, to be revealed to us today. Now, this tragedy that befell Pompeii in August of 79 was indeed a tragedy for them, for the people who lived there, obviously. It was also a tragedy for the reigning emperor, a man by the name of Titus, Titus, who's the honored and famous Architectus in Rome. We'll talk about him and his architecture in Rome later in the semester. But it was a disaster for him, and he had to contend with flames and fire in Rome also at the same time. It was very difficult for him, and poor man, even though he was quite young, died of natural causes after only 3 years of office. And I think it was in part this catastrophe that had happened in the Bay of Naples area that led in part to the stress of it, led in part to his demise. So this is a great tragedy for him, a great tragedy for the people of Pompeii, a great tragedy for Rome, but it was a stroke of good luck for archaeologists, and in a sense for us as well. Because, of course, what happened to Pompeii is something very different than what happened to Rome. What happened to Pompeii is that its life was snuffed out all at once. It came to an end all at once. Compare this to Rome, which has been inhabited over millennia. In Rome, buildings have been redone, rethought, remade over time. That never happened in Pompeii because Pompeii again died essentially in August of 79, and everything that was there was preserved just as it was, and that's how it was discovered when it was excavated in the mid-18th century, as it had been, exactly how it had been on that day in August in 79. This is extremely important. It's one of our only really fixed chronological dates. And it provides us with an incredible laboratory of material because, again, nothing is changed from the time that it was left, except for when the treasure was removed. For the most part, nothing has changed, and we can study it as it was. The other thing that you must remember from the outset, that although what was revealed by excavators in the 18th century, 19th century, and beyond even today, was not just it was the Pompeii of August 79, but the buildings that stood there were not just the buildings that had been renovated between the earthquake of 62 and the eruption of Vesuvius of 79, but some of the very earliest buildings, including the Samnite structures, still stood. And so when we look back, we will be able to trace, in a sense, the city of Pompeii and its architecture from the time of the Samnites up until the time of the Emperor Titus. I want to begin with a plan of the city of Pompeii, and you see it here. And the plan that I show you is a plan of the city as it was in AD 79. We see all of the buildings at that juncture. We see that the shape of the city is essentially an irregular rectangle. And we also can see very well that the city is surrounded by a wall, a protected wall, so it was walled like all the other cities that we've talked about thus far this term. You can see some of the major buildings very clearly. The amphitheater that we'll talk about today, the theater and the music hall over here. You can see the streets of the city, the Cardo or North-South Street, and the Decumanus or East-West Street of the city, as well as the fairly regular blocks where the houses and the shops were located. What is important to note, however, is that the Samnite city was obviously much smaller than the city of 79. And to recapture a sense of the Samnite city, we have to look at the bottom left side of this plan, where we see the original Samnite city, which seems to have been roughly a fairly regular square. And in that Samnite city, the Romans, and they followed Roman surveying methodology here, they looked to what was exactly the center of the city, and they placed the Cardo, the North-South Street, and the Decumanus, the East-West Street, at that exact midpoint of the city. And then they located, as they like to do, the forum of the city, the great meeting and marketplace, right at the intersection of the Cardo and of the Decumanus. And that is exactly where we see the forum that was begun in the Samnite period, right at the intersection of those two original streets. Then over time, obviously, as they expanded the city, the Cardo grew and the Decumanus grew, and it didn't end up exactly at the center of the larger city, but it was at the center of the original city. Let's begin, in fact, with the Forum, because the Forum was begun itself during the time of the Samnites. You'll see from your monument list that I've given you a date of the second half of the 2nd century BC for the Forum at Pompeii. And again, that indicates to us, because of the chronology of the city, of the history of the city, that it was begun in Samnite times. You see here on the screen an excellent plan of the Forum as it was and as it grew over time. Buildings were added over time. This plan is from one of the textbooks from Ward Perkins, and I think it deserves careful study. Let's describe it together today. We see that the central part of the Forum, which was again essentially the main meeting and marketplace of the Forum, is a very elongated rectangle with the temple, a Capitolium, the temple to Jupiter, located on one of the short ends. And you should be immediately, your mind's eye should go immediately to the sanctuary designs that we saw last time. Think, for example, of the sanctuary of Hercules Victor at Tivoli, where we saw that the temple was pushed up against one of the back walls, in that case the long wall, and dominated the space in front of it. We see the same kind of scheme here, where we see this rectangular space with the temple pushed up, in this case on one of the short walls, pushed up against the back wall, and then dominating the space in front of it. The Forum itself is surrounded by columns, a colonnade, as you can see here, and it is open to the sky, Then deployed around it all the other important buildings that needed to be in Forum, the Curia or Senate House over here, the Basilica or Law Court over here, another temple, in this case the Temple of Apollo, and then a series of buildings that were added later on the right side. A wonderful building of a woman that we're not going to be talking about this semester called Eumakia, and it gives you some sense that women could wield power. It wasn't easy. They couldn't vote. They couldn't hold public office, but they could sometimes wield power, and this particular woman did in Pompeii, a very large building that was for her and for her trade guild. A lararium or a place, a shrine, a market, a Macellum up there. Some of these added later. But the ones that are particularly critical to our understanding of the Samnite city are the Capitolium and are the Basilica, which both date to the 2nd century BC. Here's a view of, I'm sorry, I did want to say something about the Google Earth image on the left. This is a Google Earth image which I tried to take in such a way that one can see it almost exactly the same vantage point as the plan. And you can see everything here that I've already pointed out. The open rectangular space, the colonnade, the temple pushed up against the back wall, the Temple of Jupiter, the Basilica over here, the Temple of Apollo, Eumakia's building here, the Senate House over here, and so on. And this again underscores the value of Google Earth as one can look down on these buildings and compare what one sees to the master plan. This is a view of the colonnade. It's a 2-story colonnade at the Forum of Pompeii, and you can see the same thing that we saw happening in the Theater of Marcellus in Rome, that the columns that they have used, they have looked at the Greek orders, the Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian, and they have selected here to use the Doric for the first story and the Ionic for the second story. This colonnade does not date to the Samnite period. We believe that it was put up later, but it's made out of white limestone, and it probably again does belong to a renovation of the Forum of a somewhat later date. Look also near the columns, and you will see a series of bases. A large base over here, a smaller base over here. You see a lot of these still in the Forum today. And what these bases were for, of course, were to support statues. And then there would have been an inscription on the base identifying who that was. Sometimes they were statues of the reigning dynast in Rome, age of Augustus, it might be Augustus, or his wife Livia. but they also honored the most important people of the city of Pompeii, magistrates, great benefactors. Eumatia, we know, had a portrait inside her own building honoring her, standing next to the Empress Livia. So you have to imagine that while the forum is quite empty today, that in antiquity there would have been all of these bases with equestrian statues and full-length statues vying with one another for attention. The individuals honored there sort of jostling with one another to underscore their fame within their own city. This is a view of the Temple of Jupiter, or the Capitolium, in the Forum of Pompeii, an extremely important building. And one you can see from the monument list also began to be put up quite early, in 150 BC. But its triple cella, honoring the Capitoline triad, Jupiter, Juno, and Minerva, was, it won't surprise you to hear, put up only after the Romans made Pompeii a colony. And that happened in 80 BC. So you'll see that I've given you a date of 150 for the temple, but 80 BC for the renovation of the cella to incorporate these three spaces for statues of the Capitoline triad. Let's look at the plan first. You see it down here at the bottom. Let me move that arrow away. You see it down here at the bottom, and you can see that the plan of the temple corresponds to plans that we've seen for other temples that we've studied thus far this term, Temple of Fortunatus, for example, where we see this combination of an Etruscan plan and a Greek elevation. You can see here the facade emphasis, single staircase, deep court, freestanding columns in that court, the flat back wall, as was characteristic of Etruscan temple design, the plain side walls over here. We can see all of that in this plan, and we also know that the building was made out of stone, tufa, in this case tufa, not from Rome, but tufa from this part of Italy, from the Campanian region, tufa there for both the columns and also the capital, so a stone building. So the same combination of Etruscan plan and Greek elevation that we saw in Rome. This view of the temple also shows you that it had a tall podium, as was characteristic of the other early temples. Here you can see the remains of the stone columns and of the building itself. It's not as well preserved as we wish it were, but enough is there to give us a very good sense of what the Capitolium looked like in ancient Roman times. I mentioned that the other early structure added to the Forum complex was the Basilica of Pompeii. And I'd like to turn to that now. The Basilica of Pompeii dates to around 120 BC. You see its plan here again in the bottom left, and you'll remember it's splayed off from the Forum to the left bottom side as you face the Temple of Jupiter. You can see that the plan of the Basilica is very interesting because it actually is quite similar to the plan of the Forum itself. It is a rectangular space, not as large and not as elongated, but nevertheless a rectangular space. Its entranceway is over here from the Forum. You can see that there are columns inside, a colonnade, just as we saw in the Forum itself. And the building is organized, as is the Forum itself, axially, so that there is a focus, something at the end that serves as a focus, and then the axiality comes from that. We see the focus over here at the end. It's not another temple. It is a tribunal on which the judge would sit to try the law cases that came here. The main difference between the Basilica and the Forum itself is that the Basilica was roofed in antiquity. The roof is no longer there, as you saw in the Google Earth view, but it was roofed in antiquity, whereas, again, the Forum was open to the sky. The view that you see of the Basilica as it looks today is also very illuminating. We are looking toward the tribunal. You can see the tribunal is actually extremely well preserved. We get a very good sense of what it looked like in antiquity. It itself has a tall podium. We can imagine the magistrate holding court up here on the top of that tall podium between the Corinthian columns in this case. We're not absolutely sure, but we believe the second story, which has smaller columns, they diminish in size on the second story, also were Corinthian columns, because you can see at least one of them. One of them is restored at the top right, but that one is a Corinthian capital. So we believe Corinthian order on the lower story, Corinthian order on the second story as well, beginning to show this Roman penchant for the Corinthian order, which we've already discussed. And you can also see here some of the lower parts of the columns that would have been encircling the center of the structure and dividing the central space from two aisles, one on either side. It looks like they're made out of brick, but they're actually made out of a tile that looks like brick. Brick wasn't being used quite this early, but a tile resembling brick was used in Pompeii, and you can see that served as the core of the columns. They would have been stuccoed over, though, and looked more like white marble, indicating to us, again, this desire of the Romans to make things look, at least for the Samnites at this point, and ultimately the Romans when they renovated the structure, to make it look as Greek as possible. Yeah. Why are the columns chopped up and almost all in the same place? You know, these things were often pieced, and so sometimes that can happen. And it's actually one of the, you raise a very interesting issue, because one of the things that archaeologists are beginning to speculate only recently about, you see this in some of the most recent literature, is, you know, we think, here we say, and I said it today, that this city was preserved exactly as it was in 79. And yet when you look at what it looks like, it's actually in pretty ruinous state. So that could mean two things. One, that they didn't make all that much progress in that 17 years, that they worked very hard, but the damage had been so significant that they were not able to bring these things back, you know, as much as they had hoped to. But it also may be just the destruction. I mean, while the ash and lava covered the city and protected it, it obviously wrought some damage as well. So that some of these things, you know, obviously came down, and over time the material got, you know, washed away or taken away or whatever. But it is curious that they sort of broke in exactly the same place. But it's because of the construction technique and the way in which they pieced together. Yeah, exactly. Let me show you another view of the right side wall of the basilica. You see these columns here again, very regular. There's a young woman standing right here, so that gives you a sense of scale. She's about only up to this point of the column, so you can see how large in scale these were in ancient Roman times. If you look at the two that are closest to the tribunal, you will see that they have Ionic capitals. So that gives us enough to go on to speculate that the first story of columns, and there were two stories on the wall, two stories of columns, the lower ones were Ionic, and you can see that they are attached or engaged into the wall. Those were Ionic, and then we believe that there was a second story, we know that it was a second story, but that the second story of columns would have been Corinthian capitals up there. This is a restored view of what the basilica would have looked like in 120 after it was built, 120 BC after it was built. And you can see here the tribunal. We're looking for the tribunal. It's two stories, Corinthian order on both stories, hall podium. You see here in black the columns of the central space that divide the center from the two side aisles. And here you can see very well the way in which they created two stories, a bottom story and an upper story. You could walk on that upper story, and using the Ionic capitals in the first story and smaller Corinthian columns in the second story. And it's important for me to note, in terms of the later development of basilican architecture, that this basilica in Pompeii at this early date did not have what's called a clear story. C-L-E-R-E-S-T-O-R-Y. C-L-E-R-E-S-T-O-R-Y, a clear story. What is a clear story? A clear story is a series of windows open to the outside that allow views out and light in. This building does not have a clear story, so it probably, in its heyday, in the Samnite period, was probably on the dark side. But we will see the clear story is incorporated into later Roman basilican architecture. One of the greatest buildings, without any question, at Pompeii, and one that everyone flocks to see, and if you've never been to Pompeii, let me just note that it is a little bit further out than some of the other structures, but it is a to not be missed monument. And in fact, I know at least one of you has already spoken to me about an upcoming trip to Rome and Pompeii, and consequently, I just say that you absolutely need, and you could spend days at Pompeii, but you must have a full day for Pompeii, because in order to get to the, and not just to see the forum and what's in the center and a few of the houses, to get out, it doesn't take that long. It's a nice walk, it's not a huge distance, but people forget to do it because it's on the outskirts. But you really must get to the two end points are the amphitheater and the Villa of the Mysteries. Both of them absolutely incredible to see and too often missed by tourists. But two of the great sights at the city of Pompeii. This is the amphitheater as it looks today from the air. The amphitheater is one of several buildings that were begun immediately upon the Romans making Pompeii a Roman colony in 80 BC. You can only imagine those veterans, those army veterans of war, who had just been settled in their new homes, clamoring from day one for the amphitheater, a place where they could go for gladiatorial and animal combat. This is what they wanted to see, and consequently, no local magistrate or emperor worth their salt would allow the city to continue without, there was no emperor in 80 BC, but would allow the city to go on without an amphitheater. So that was one of the first orders of business. This amphitheater at Pompeii, which dates, we believe, to 80 to 70 BC, is an incredibly important building for the history of Roman architecture because it is our first preserved stone amphitheater. And all the amphitheaters that come later, including the great Colosseum in Rome, are based on buildings like this one. This was a great experiment in amphitheater design already in 80 to 70 BC. How did they go about building this amphitheater? What they seem to have done is to excavate the central area, the earth of the central area, to create a space for the oval arena, which you see here. And I put the terms on the monument list for you. The arena, which you see here. So they've excavated that central space, placed the arena there. Then they have piled up earth. It's essentially an earthen bowl is what they created here. An earthen bowl with the excavated space for the arena, and then piled up the earth on the outside to support the seats, to serve as a support for the seats. There was no natural hill here, so they had to do this on their own. So they build up the earth, they place the seats, they line that earthen bowl with seats, stone seats. And they create the cavea of the amphitheater because we use the same term for the seats of an amphitheater as for the seats of a theater. The cavea, or C-A-V-E-A, the cavea, or the seats of the amphitheater. And you can also see here, like indicated, the wedge-shaped sections of the seats, just as in the theater. They are called the same thing, the cuneus, C-U-N-E-U-S, or in the plural, cunei, C-U-N-E-I. So these wedge-shaped individual sections, the cuneus, all of them together, cunei, the cunei, or wedge-shaped sections of the seats apparent here. The exits and entrances, and there are a couple of major ones on either side, those have a colorful and unforgettable name. I guarantee you will remember this name for the rest of your lives. Those exits and entrances are called vomitoria, which means they literally spit forth spectators. Vomitoria. These entrances and exits to the amphitheater. Let me also note that the outer ring, and the outer ring is extremely important because it buttresses the earthen bowl. That outer ring is made of concrete that we'll see is faced with opus impertum work. And the entire structure is encircled by an annular vault, one of these ring vaults that encircles the entire structure that is made out of concrete. So another early example of the masterful use of concrete faced with opus impertum work, in this case, in the amphitheater in Pompeii. I show you a Google Earth image of this, which gives you a very good sense of the oval shape of the original structure. I think it's important to compare the exterior of the amphitheater of Pompeii, which is extremely well preserved, as you can see here, with the experiment at the much earlier sanctuary of Fortuna Primigenia at Palestrina, where we also saw this use of concrete faced with opus impertum work. If we look at the facade of the amphitheater at Pompeii, we'll see, first of all, how exceedingly well preserved it was. We also see this unique staircase here with stairs, and I'll show you a side view in a moment where you can see those stairs. The stairs leading up on both sides to the apex, and then a series of arches in diminishing size, larger in the center, diminishing in size as they go down the ramp that correspond to the shape of the ramp, and then additional arcades over here. These are what are called blind arcades because you'll see that they have a wall in the back. You can't walk in these arcades and get into the amphitheater. There are only two barrel-vaulted corridors, and we saw them in the general view, one on either long side of the oval. That you can actually walk in and out of the amphitheater from them. But you can go up the staircase and enter the amphitheater as well from the pavia. Go up to the top, and you'll just go at the uppermost part of the steps and walk down to your seats that way. So the blind arcades you can see here, we can see that once again, just as we saw in some of the other buildings we looked at last time, the way in which they've used opus and terminando for most of the wall, facing to the concrete for most of the wall, but they have used stone, both blocks of stone and these bourgeois blocks, wedge-shaped blocks, to articulate the arcades, to make them more prominent and also to give the building additional stability. What's interesting here, and one of the reasons I also bring back the sanctuary of Fortuna Primigenia, is the fact that the Romans, again, are giving you some options in terms of how you get into this building. You can get into the barrel-vaulted corridor, or you can climb up this distinctive staircase. And by the way, we have no other, truly is a unique staircase. We have no other one like it in the history of Roman architecture. So you have those options, but again, they are still predetermining the way in which you go. I mean, they give you a few options, but within that scheme, it is clearly a predetermined path up the staircase over here, and then through only those two barrel-vaulted corridors. And we talked about that at the Fortuna Primigenia sanctuary, up the ramps and then up the staircase in the center, a very similar way of thinking about getting people from one place to another in an orderly way. The staircase is so distinctive that, and here I show you a side view of it where you can actually see the steps leading up. And if you go visit, they should try both options. I mean, go down the corridor, but also it's a lot of fun to go up the steps and into the pavia. But it's so distinctive and never to be repeated that when we look, there's a painting that survives from a Pompeian house. We'll look at it in more detail later in the semester. But I wanted to just show it to you now because it is so apparent that it is a representation of the amphitheater at Pompeii. It's not surprising, this is a house in Pompeii. But you see that distinctive staircase here with the steps, the way in which you can enter into the pavia. You get a sense of the pavia and the kind of goings-on that happens in this Pompeii amphitheater. But you can also see, this is a very important detail that this is the only place where we actually have a representation of it. You can see that at the uppermost part of the pavia, there is an awning called a velarium, and I put that word on the monument list for you. An awning that was supported by poles that were located on brackets at the uppermost part of the amphitheater. And that awning, the purpose of that awning, the Pompeians seem to have a thing for protecting, the Romans in general, for protecting people in inclement weather. So they put these awnings up. When it rained, they put these awnings up to protect those who were there to see a gladiatorial combat, to protect them from that rain. One last view of the amphitheater of Pompeii. We are looking at it at bowl-shaped arena, as you can see here, and the seats that do survive to get a sense of the interior. Here you can see very well the two barrel-vaulted entrances and exits, one on either side, and that's the only way. Again, those blind arcades, you can't get in that way, and you can see that very well here. Those are the only entrance or exits into the theater besides the staircase. And in the introductory lecture, I made the point, and I'll just bring it back home again, that the Yale Bowl here in New Haven is based on the amphitheater in Pompeii. There's no question about that. In fact, if one goes back in the literature on the bowl and its original construction, it was even mentioned in original articles that the architects were looking back. And I'm not making this up. The architects were actually looking back at the Pompeii amphitheater as a model. And you can see the relationship. When you look at the bowl from the air, you can see it is a bowl. It's kind of a bowl shape, almost exactly like the shape of the Pompeii amphitheater. This aerial view, by the way, was taken at the time of the 100th game between Yale and Harvard. You can see the stands were packed. The major difference between these two amphitheaters is the fact that the one in Pompeii was made to hold 20,000 people. The one in Yale can hold up to as many as 78,000 people. So we have a larger amphitheater, so to speak, here than they did and do in the city of Pompeii. I want to move from the amphitheater to the other great entertainment district of Pompeii, and that was the theater and the music hall. The theater and the music hall. And I want to show those to you fairly quickly. We see them here in plan, the theater in red and the music hall here in a kind of, I don't know, chartreuse. As you can see, it dates to 80 to 70 BC. So another example of a building that was added when the Romans gained ascendance of this part of the world. And a couple of terms again, we can see if we look at the theater, we can see the fact that the theater is...
Mi tele de siempre tiene el smart, algo que le sigue a smart, con el de Cocuatro está con tecnología.
Hadn't y'all took your part?
Yes.
Did George have a view? And how did y'all do?
Just right on the back porch where we usually spend our time as we're able to kind of figure out jobs as opposed to inside. And
Cigarette smoking not allowed indoors?
it's not.
Okay. Do you have pets?
Yes, I do.
Or did you have pets?
I did, yes.
Okay. Were they with y'all there that day?
Yes, my dogs were with me all the time when I was there.
How many dogs do you have?
I have two,
And what are their names?
Penny and Tess.
And what is the breed?
They are red Boston Terriers.
And are they both the same?
Yes, Peggy is blind and Tess is deaf.
So when y'all went out to smoke on the back porch and drink, I assume, as well, correct?
Yes.
Did y'all take the dogs out?
Oh, yes.
Is there a place for them to do their business out there?
Yes, I extended our back porch for them to have a little bit of area as opposed to going from a large backyard from my marital home to our little townhome. And they would come out there and do their business, and I would sometimes open the gate and walk them in the back part of our apartment.
So you and George were just going to enjoy the day together?
Correct.
Is it fair to say y'all don't have a lot of money?
Yes.
And so y'all were going to do something there in the home. Y'all weren't going out for dinner or...
Yes, we primarily, I would consider us providers as opposed to living out.
Okay. And how long do you think y'all were out that afternoon outside?
2 hours.
Could you tell the jury what y'all did?
We have a dartboard that's out there, and we just have drinks, and we're just really enjoying each other's company, talking about, things that are coming, we both were looking for a job, and just kind of get
Now you said he had a job. Was he looking for a job, a second job?
No, the job that he had was very unstable, and at that,
So he was looking for something new.
yes, at that time, yes.
And so So during that 2 or 3 hours, would it be fair to say that y'all drank the bottle?
Yes.
So would it be fair to say that y'all are feeling the effects of the alcohol? Okay. At some point, who made the decision to come in?
I did.
Okay. Why did y'all come in?
I thought George might be receiving.
Okay. So y'all came in, and then did y'all do anything else before you left again? Did y'all doing anything? I know y'all did some arts and crafts. What did y'all do? At some point, you went to get another bottle of Publix.
Yes. After, I believe it was after we had, it was right before I believe that we had gone inside. He called his daughters. I was trying to encourage him to call his family.
Where are his daughters?
His 2 daughters are located in Pennsylvania.
And what are their names?
Anna and Destiny.
And how old are they?
I believe that Anna is in her 30s. Early 20s.
All right. Does he have any more children?
Yes, he has a son.
And what is his son?
He's in Pennsylvania also.
So part of that afternoon is y'all came in to call relatives, call family.
No, I had him call outside, just trying to, I guess, boost the mood. The first daughter didn't answer, and I don't remember the reason I didn't speak to the second one. I believe he told me it was just for a moment.
Whose phone y'all using?
My phone.
And is that common for y'all to use that, for y'all to share that phone?
It was because George said that he didn't have a phone, so it would either be lost or given to him by his mother. So I didn't know he had a cell phone, so we didn't use my phone.
It was primarily your phone.
Yes.
And took a lot of photographs.
He and I both. Yes.
That phone, was that the one that was seized from this man?
Yes.
All right, so y'all called his daughters, and then during that phone call period, did you also call his brother?
Yes.
Which brother was that?
John.
And how many brothers and sisters does George have?
I'm gonna listen.
Okay.
It's John, Pharrell, Isaac, Mo, and his sister.
And do they all live here in Florida?
Yes.
Are they close by? What about his parents? They live here as well? But his ex-wife, and his children live up in Philadelphia. So we called George called his brother. Was that conversation that long?
So,
And then after that phone call, were y'all inside by this time?
yes, at this point, I believe that it was a good time to get a change of scenery. So I thought George would be better off inside, and frankly, I didn't want to be outside a lot.
So just to get an idea, about this time is when you went to get the second bottle, or did y'all stay inside for a while before you left?
No, from what I recall, it was, I thought the day was over, and it was going to be, get ready for the evening, for the day, what do you want for dinner, do you have an extra load of laundry that you need to throw in, kind of thing, and that was my understanding. And so,
This was about 5-ish or something? Okay. At some point during that time period, did George go to Publix again?
yes, I thought he was going to be walking to the convenience store, but apparently, to return, he had gone across the street with my car and my debit card to my
What was your understanding of where he was going?
to the convenience store.
came back and you know, did he use your vehicle?
Yes.
Did he use your debit card?
Yes.
And then he brought back a bottle of wine from home. And you saw the couple video of that. So he comes back with the other bottle of wine, and did he want you to drink with him?
Daniel.
And then you agreed to consume the second bottle with him.
Yeah.
So over the course of that evening, drinking the wine, what did y'all do time-wise? Really, just kind of tell me what you remember. I know it's been a while, but.
It was kind of a regular thing where I would always come up with entertaining activities for George, and I bought a puzzle. We started off at one point doing a smaller puzzle, and then we did that very quickly. So then I purchased a larger puzzle, and I believe it was 1,000 pieces. So I thought to get his mind off of things and focus on something, it would be smart for us to do the puzzle. So for however long that took, we finished the puzzle. So that was one.
Every piece was finished, or was it?
Every piece was finished. It was strange that we couldn't find one piece, and we thought it was funny that, like, in the I think everyone went once.
All right, after the puzzle, what y'all do?
I decided to continue to maintain and focus him, and I had a bunch of paints that I used of my son's that his grandmother bought him. It's a very big art wooden box, and it's got pastel pencils, whatever. And he and I were very much into art, and with this resource, it got him very interested in being more.
How long have you been involved?
Ever since I can remember, as a child,
You're up to draw?
I have been.
And I know, we saw some of the pictures of your apartment, but it looks like it was pictures and art and stuff. Is that all your work and George's work?
The majority of it, yes, are belongings from my home, and then also some of George's, yes.
Is he pretty good at art as well? So y'all got out Lucas's art set. What did y'all do with that?
We were just, I guess, doodling, whatever. I would always tell him that everything that you make is a masterpiece. So just let loose and just let it go. And we would just paint and paint and drink, yes, and listen to music sometimes. Yeah.
Now with the dog, what did y'all do?
Oh, yes, my dog's fun.
There's some dancing going on and all.
My dog stepped on a
After
bee.
we had completed the puzzle and piece it out, I thought that it might be a good point for us to maybe listen to some music. And the music that George listens to is it's very fractious to me, and it's definitely not going to lighten the mood. So we ended up finding some channel on the radio, and he was feeling it, and then we ended up, my one dog gets really active and he's dancing with us, and we were just having a good time listening to music.
And I guess it's getting pretty late in the evening.
Yes.
Anything else I've missed? All right. So tell us where y'all ended up before you started the game and how you did.
I couldn't think of anything else possibly that I had to continue entertainment. But I remember sitting at the end of the couch and him sitting in one of my son's chairs that was in the living room, and just kind of like, what are we gonna do now? Like, are there enough time to sleep? I don't know, to be honest.
Would it be fair to say that as the day wore on, the boy got to sleep? And would it be fair to say that as the day went on, the more you would see it, the more effect she felt from that. So you would agree, would you not, that at the time y'all are trying to figure out something to do, that you, right now on the couch, that y'all, would it be fair to say that y'all were intoxicated?
Yes.
Tell the jury what happened.
At one point, I guess that I couldn't remember anything else. Tapped on my feet and said, "That's it." So from there, I ran up the stairs and hid into our shower, just waiting for him to find me so we could hopefully go to sleep soon at some point. And
The shower, is it a tub or just a walk-in?
it's a tub, but it's in the master bedroom, and you have to go all the way upstairs and go in the bedroom, and then you have to go into the bathroom part, and then
So did you lay down in the tub?
at first, at one point, yes, I was
You were hiding.
trying.
Okay. And did you believe that he was going to come try to find you?
Yes,
Did you wait?
yes, for quite some time.
Okay. Then what did you decide to do?
And I decided that I need to go to sleep, I need to do something, and I went downstairs to find where he was.
And what, I think the jury has seen pictures of your, you call it an apartment or
It's considered a townhome.
a town? So you walk down the stairs, right? And at the bottom of the stairs is a bookshelf here?
Yes, at the very end of it, yes.
Okay. So you walk down the stairs and try and look in the living room.
I don't even think I made it all the way down the stairwell because I was just looking for him as soon as I could to go upstairs as soon as we could. And I looked over and I saw him settling himself in the suitcase.
Tell us about the suitcase. How long, is it an old suitcase?
Yes,
Whose suitcase was it?
this is George's suitcase.
All right, and did he use it for traveling back and forth to Philly?
Yes, I had recently taken him on a trip to go see his children in Pennsylvania who he hasn't seen in years, and he took that with us. And because of how dilapidated it was, how broken it was, in the end, after that trip, we decided that we would donate it.
And I understand y'all kept the suitcase upstairs.
Yes,
How long did y'all keep it upstairs?
since we had been,
Is there a closet up there where you kept it in?
yes, it was in the master closet, the master bedroom closet, all the way in the back because of the size of it, and there was nowhere to put it, so all the way in the back.
So when did y'all decide to move it down from upstairs to downstairs? Was it that day or sometime later?
No, it was maybe a week or so prior.
So what, y'all were gonna donate that to Goodwill or?
Yes, we were going to do, I guess, a spring cleaning. Anyone who has children understands that they grow quickly, and there was a lot of clothes that I needed to go through of my sons, and then also from George and I moving in and just kind of putting everything in there. At one point, waiting to actually go for it.
That's the reason it was downstairs. You were gonna donate it, and a bunch of things that came inside.
Correct, yes.
Okay. So it was already down there.
Yes, George brought it down.
Okay. So you said that you got down there, you're looking for him, you see him settling into the suitcase.
Yes.
What did you do?
In my head, I said, oh man, we're obviously not going to be going to sleep anytime soon. And I walked over and he was trying to get himself flat so I couldn't tell that he was in there. And then,
Well, let me stop. The suitcase, is it the suitcase over here?
yes,
It's a pretty big suitcase.
George was my height.
How tall are you?
I'm
Y'all. What is this big y'all?
So because of his thinness, that kind of thing, he's a small man.
Yes.
So he was able to get in the suitcase on his own. And he willingly get in the suitcase.
30th.
When you got to him, did he see you?
Yes.
Tell us what happened.
I mean, it just kind of flipped him up. We thought it was funny, and we were joking about how he was small enough to fit inside the suitcase. Laughing about it, and it was just strange that he was small enough to fit in.
Ejecución rápida. Precios competitivos. Soporte 24/7. Retiro sin complicaciones. Seguí tu pasión por Exnes. Born to Trade.
Volvamos a lo esencial, a la leche fresca, la del sallé de la Serenísima, que llega del campo a tu casa en menos tiempo y conserva su frescura sin aditivos ni conservantes.
The top was kind of flopping a little bit.
When he had gotten in there to hide, he pulled the top.
Yes.
You could tell. Saw him not moving.
Yes.
So at some point, did he zip him up?
Yes.
And what was he saying or doing when you were zipping him up?
Just thought it was funny.
You both laughed. And so you zipped him up. And y'all still laughing once you zipped him up? Tell me what happened there.
From there, I moved the suitcase around a couple of times, just kind of like on the wheels and moved it around. And at that point, it was funny. We were joking and laughing about it.
Now, eventually, you go sit down.
Yes. The suitcase had, me moving it around was flopped over. So while it was like that, I thought at that point I had a moment to, I guess, take the time to talk to him. I guess he was not able to get out for a moment.
You flipped it. You got it on the top, right? It gets in, but at some point you flip it over so the zipper is on the bottom.
It was just kind of how I was moving it around and it ended up kind of flopping, so.
It was upside down.
Yes.
So after you did that,
That's when I went over and decided to videotape to
¿Cómo se acuerda de
just
ser
see
borracho?
I guess the gist in it for him to understand that right now I feel safe and right now I have the ability to actually see to in a manner that normally I would not have the ability to do.
you're intoxicated. You said some things you should not.
Yes.
You realized he could not get out and get at you. Is that fair?
At that moment, yes.
So it goes on for about 10 minutes.
Yes.
You heard it, did that, did you not?
Yes.
You heard his voice as he was speaking from the suitcase.
Yes.
That was his voice on the video.
Yes.
And you heard your voice on the video. That was your voice.
Yes.
All those things said by the man were said by George in the video. All the words said by the female were said by you in the video. And you were intending on showing him the video the next day.
Yes.
At the time, or the next day, so, from what you can tell from watching it, did that refresh your memory about that too? What did you say?
Vivo. ¿Qué pasa? ¿Qué se ríe? Tratando de reírse. ¿Qué está pasando? Eso. ¿Qué pasa, ingeniero?
Mr. Owens, you may proceed.
I'm talking about just the 2-minute video that was recorded. Could you just tell the jury what you were feeling, what your feelings were at the time, and then explain that to me. You mentioned, you talked about it before. You said he was in that confined space and it was my chance, but is that, you want to elaborate on that? Or?
Sure. I want you all to know that the majority of the time, I was afraid. Good. I just want to, yes.
And did you want him to see it? Someone comfort? You know, at some point, you turned off the video. And then
¿Qué
we
se
saw
ríe?
a second video, which is approximately 11 minutes late. And that video was 22 seconds long. And I don't think he's speaking that video. You hear Jordan say Sarah one time. Is that fair to say? So between the 2-minute video and the 22-second video is an 11-minute period. Could you tell me about that? Don't you let him out or something?
I'm sure so. And it just got very heated very quickly, and we continued to push on the suitcase. And my fear was that he was going to break out of the suitcase knowing that it was a broken suitcase. And his hand started to come through, his hand started to come through this way. And so I shook the suitcase, trying to get his hand to go back in, shaking it, and telling him that, please stop doing this, please stop doing this to me, please stop doing this to me.
So his hand actually got out of the suitcase.
Yes,
And you went to the suitcase
yes,
and shook it.
yes.
Did that force his hand to go back in? So you're shaking, to try to get his hand out.
Yeah.
How long did you shake it? But his hand was still out.
Yeah.
Was he trying to get out?
So, yeah.
Was he angry at you? Were you in fear?
Oh,
If you would have gotten out of the suitcase, what would he have done?
I tried to tell him he would be unrecognizable, or I would have lost my life.
Where was the back?
It was, against
How far was the back from the suitcase? Was his hand still out of the suitcase? Or was he getting out of the suitcase?
very much of the time, yes.
And so what did you do?
What's the reaction that I had? I happened to see that and I grabbed the baseball bat and was trying to poke his hand to go back in to please don't break through, please. So I hit his hand.
Did you hit the outside part of his hand?
Yes.
You've seen the photographs of his left hand. Did you cause a bruising there?
Yes.
Now, you've seen the back.
Yes, I bought it for my son.
Is this back to you?
Yes.
And you said you poked him with it?
Yes, I kind of pushed, like I held it with the skinny part here. Trying to do that, so I started to push on the suitcase around it, hoping to have his hand retract and go back inside.
Who made those injuries? We've seen the photographs. We've seen the bruising. Is that from that bat? Eventually, did his hand go back inside from you doing? So in your mind, did you prevent him from attacking?
Absolutely. Split decision.
And once he retracted his hand, did you remember zipping it up some? What did you do in relation? Because he was upside down, was he not? At that point.
Yes,
At some point, you flipped him back up.
I did.
Don't tell how that happened.
He wasn't cursing, he wasn't threatening, his hand was inside, foremost. There was no him trying to break through the suitcase. So I felt safe enough to turn it back over. It wasn't happening.
Get back to the video of the couch.
I did, yes.
You saw the second video. 22 seconds, and he's right side up again. And you hear me say center.
Yes.
Have you left enough room for him to get out? Zipper to zipper.
Yes. That was Andy's turn.
That suitcase has two zippers. In various places along the line. How much room? Flip it open. How much room? After you hit him with the bat, was he not trying to get out of the door? Did you believe him? Did you ever believe him? Are you trying to kill him? Did you want to kill him? Did you walk upstairs?
Did.
Why didn't you let him out?
Specialist, you are, I believe. Yes, you are a very specialist.
Terrified for
My brain.
As long as he was in the suitcase, he couldn't hold you.
You will have to go out.
my son stop being angry because I know what it is for him to be angry.
Went upstairs. What was the door?
The dog
What was the door? Did you have to phone him?
Yes,
I know at some point you called the person run, did you not?
I did.
Do you recall how long that conversation was?
Not very long.
Did you recall?
I don't remember exactly, no, I don't.
This friend, here, when you said that when he was in the suitcase, he was threatening her, threatening you. Can you tell the jury what he was saying?
I don't know, am I allowed to first?
Yes.
And he was going to fucking end me. And that's what made me ask him please to stop doing what he's doing to me. That he was going to, I'm guessing, try his best that night and probably take my life.
But what, the threat you heard was
He's going to
say the word.
end me.
Excuse me?
Fucking end me.
End you?
Yes.
All right, members of the jury, it is 2:14. I have a matter that I have to discuss with counsel at this point in time outside of your presence. So I'm going to ask you to retire to the deliberation room. We'll bring you back in as promptly as possible. Again, similar instruction that I've given you, please do not conduct any independent investigation or research as the person, places, things, or charge involved, and do not have any discussions among yourselves or anyone else about those things. We'll bring you back in as promptly as possible. Thank you. State, you can proceed with any argument at this point.
What we have here is testimony from the defendant. Her timeline is she comes downstairs after having gone up to the shower, hiding, letting comes back downstairs, and before she gets back to the bottom of the stairwell, she can see that the victim is in the suitcase trying to get flat because the lid is flopping and he's not hidden just yet. So she comes over, and I believe she testified she's moving it around before actually zipping the lid shut, but moving it around, everybody's laughing, it's all fun and games still, and then she zips it, and it's still fun and games, and everybody's laughing. And then at this point, she testifies that this is now her opportunity to get on her pulpit to express her true feelings about everything. And that's when she sits down on the couch and opens up her phone device and begins recording what later turns out to be IMG _1060.movie at 11:45. During this period of time, the decedent is expressing weakly that he can't breathe. The only time he expresses that to her is, here, I can't fucking breathe, babe, I can't fucking breathe. He is demonstrating under the law that he is in fear of losing his life. She has committed an aggravated assault. She has committed false imprisonment. She was the initial aggressor. There was no overt act to justify these actions that was permitted. She then goes on to say that during this period of time between the end of the movie at 11:14:48 seconds and before the next one starts at 11:23, that it's now this time, while he's still constrained and clearly unable to get out under his own power, despite having his hand out, she begins beating him with a bat, poking his hand, poking the suitcase with a deadly weapon. The bat is used for baseball, but it can also be used to harm another person. And according to medical examiner's testimony, there was great harm causing him deep ecchymosis bruises. She can't start to do this out of fear, like the analogy I gave earlier. If I pull a gun to rob you, Judge, and you pull a gun, I can't shoot you in self-defense. She started this. She started this. There is no overt act, and therefore, we're asking for you to prevent, under the case law, any prior instances of violence, any reputation evidence, and any bad instruction evidence. And because that's simply just what the case ends up being. Thank you.
Response.
Judge, this is a game by two intoxicated people. When people are drunk and intoxicated, they do silly and stupid things. The evidence is uncontroverted. The George Torres willingly, by his own choice, or left it to hide in the suitcase. By their interaction between the two of them, giggling and laughing at each other, he consented to her zipping up the suitcase. And the playful nature of what was going on during those few minutes prior to the video. When the video is turned on, there's a 2-minute period where they're talking. He's saying, I need to get out, I can't breathe. She's not taking him seriously, as you've seen from the videos. I thought it was the boy crying wolf. She did not appreciate the fact that he could be actually having trouble breathing. And this was a chance for him to be heard about how she felt about some things involving their relationship. A short time later, the video was turned off, and then that period has been testified to by my client. And that period is uncontroverted. That's a second period of time. We got that time for the video. We got the 11 minutes, the next 20 seconds. And there's no video, there's no audio, there's no eyewitness, there's nothing but Sarah Boone's testimony. And she's testified here today that they had words with threats. He got his hand out of the suitcase. She knew by the threats and him getting his hand out of the suitcase that he was about to get out of the suitcase and he was going to hurt her. A reasonable person under that scenario would believe she was about to be hurt. She was an imminent threat of harm. She blocked that attack by grabbing the bat, hitting his hand. When that didn't work, she started poking him with the bat in the suitcase. Eventually, she poked him several times. He put his hand inside the suitcase. She put the bat up, and she realized he was not going to do that any further. She flipped him over, right side up. She still had a fear, knowing that if he got out, she would be hurt. He would beat her up. She went upstairs. That is an overt act based on the discussions, coupled with the fact that he threatened her, using the word fucking end it for you, or some words to that effect. I don't remember her exact words, just before she went upstairs, while he was still in the suitcase. If she would have let him out, and this is now this is an event involving an omission, failure to act, failure to unzip it, like that point, before she went upstairs. The failure to act, the failure to unzip, which would have let him out, which would have created a situation that she believed was imminent bodily harm of himself. And I guess I'll give a couple of examples. Let's say that a police officer is called to a scene and the only thing he hears is there is a suspect and the suspect may be armed. Of course, the officer pulls out his revolver and is walking around, but then eventually he finds the suspect and the suspect reaches for his waist. The officer doesn't see the gun, but the officer sees the movement to the waist. The officer fires and shoots the suspect. The officer is justified because there's an immediate threat of harm. The officer has to react instinctively. There's no time to think. Similar to the actions that Sarah Boone had to take. Another example, you're in a bar with your buddies and you've had something to drink and another group has had something to drink and one of your buddies gets into an argument with one of your buddies on the other party. And one of your friends, seeing that it's being escalated, and the guy that's arguing with your buddy is aggressive, more aggressive than your buddy is. Your buddy's trying to settle the thing, but this other individual, maybe he's had too much to drink and he's more aggressive. So you go around behind you, and instead of he's able to strike your buddy, You grab him. You lock him up. That's physical restraint to block an attack. Or you grab him by the neck and you choke him. Physical restraint to block an attack. That's what she was doing with the suitcase. If she let him out of the suitcase, she was going to be harmed. Based on him trying to get out with his hand, based on the threats he made while he had his hand out, and based on the threats he made while he had his hand inside just before she went upstairs.
Thank you. Court's going to re-review the case law that is obtained in its research in this matter and come back with a oral ruling momentarily. Thank you.
No quiero ver más este teclado por el tiempo, Olvídate. Muy largo, muchacho.
Hello, everybody. How is everyone doing?
Pero hoy es
Do we imagine seeing that for the first time?
¿Están vivos ahora? Qué raro. beautiful. Ah, sí, entonces.
We're back on the record, State of Florida versus Sarah Boone, case number 2020 CF 2603. Appearances for the state. Defense.
Tony Henderson,
Ms. Boone is currently seated at counsel's table, wearing the same clothing from this morning. Court has the opportunity to review the case law, review the arguments provided by both the state and the defense. Court finds that a overt act has been established. Case law is clear that a scintilla of the providing of the overt act is sufficient to provide the self-defense jury instruction. An overt act is not something that's specifically defined, and for the case law, it's something that's from the totality of the circumstances, seemingly under the authorities that the court has reviewed. As such, the court is going to find that under Holland, a overt act has been established and will allow the defense to proceed with evidence of reputation and specific conduct and battered spouse evidence, so long as the necessary predicates are established for those items. Any questions or clarifications with regard to the court's order, state? Defense.
I think it was all that we went through, my exhibits, the long photographs, and other photographs, and I think continue on a good deal. So, I don't know if you want to deal with all of them one at a time in front of the jury, or whether we want to just talk about them ahead of time, so that we know.
Are there any objections to those items?
It depends on the items. I was shown a lot of different things, including rap sheets between the victim and defense. I'm happy to take care of some of this stuff in advance.
I'd rather do it now, so that it's not up, down, in and out with the jury. Go ahead, Mr. Owens. What do we got? Okay.
Identification, defense identification, composite L, 2 photographs, on bond, to the left.
So that was L, correct?
Identification, 2 photographs, the first one is a photograph of the back porch, there's on the back porch, it's the wall. This is the porch dog.
Relative to the objections of the rule. Okay, no objection. understanding, is this O? This is still O, correct?
Yes.
My understanding from the state is there's no objection so long as the foundation is established. Thank you.
We also intend to introduce a video, there's a short video on the sunset.
No objection so long as foundation is established.
B, identification, defense identification. B, is two photographs of the incident in which
No objection so long as appropriate predicate is established.
Q, identification of photograph.
Regard to Q, no objection so long as the appropriate foundation is laid.
Identification R.
No objection to R so long as foundation is laid.
Identification.
With regard to S, no objection so long as foundation is laid.
T.
No objection by the state so long as appropriate foundation is laid. No objection from the state so long as appropriate foundation is laid for E. Same for G. W. X. Y. Were these the ones that we addressed pre-trial? Okay, thank you. Okay. Is it contained in K through Y? Then, is that accurate? If it's I'll allow you to use it for demonstrative purposes, but I'm not going to accept it into evidence as it is duplicative. What's already in evidence is X. Defense pre-marked X. That was it was one of the earlier ones we addressed. M or N was the staircase. Okay, for the same reasons, you can utilize it for demonstrative purposes, but it's duplicative as the exhibit itself will be entered into evidence, presumably. Any disagreement that it's included in your remarks? Okay, then same ruling, it is duplicative, you can utilize it for demonstrative purposes. Is it included, sir, in K through Y? Then for the same reasons it's duplicative, you can utilize it for demonstrative purposes. It's included in your submittals. All right, same rule, it's duplicative, you can utilize it for demonstrative purposes, but it will not be accepted into evidence. Is it included in your submittal, sir?
Yes.
All right, for the same reasons, I find it duplicative, you can utilize it for demonstrative purposes, but not seeking it into evidence. Same ruling, you can use it for demonstrative purposes, but it will not be received into evidence by virtue of it being duplicative.
Identification, I.
Any disagreement with that, sir? Same rule, if court finds it's duplicative, you can utilize it for demonstrative purposes.
Identification.
Hang on, is that the house? I think that's Bravo. Is it the defendant on the porch with the two dogs? That was pre-marked before trial with Bravo. It was, as defense M, relevancy objection is overruled, but I'm not going to allow the enlargement as it's duplicative, as the native photo is in evidence. But you can use it for demonstrative purposes. Oh, however you see fit, sir. I can't speak to that. I don't know that anybody today has utilized it. But that's not connected to the overhead. That's separate and apart from the overhead.
Maybe somebody can finish the testimony. We've got two ladies out there.
Any other exhibits with regard to Ms. Boone at this point in time, Mr. Owens? State any reason why we cannot ask Ms. Owens or Mr. Owens to continue his inquiry of Ms. Boone and have her return to the witness stand. All right. Mr. Owens, anything else we need to discuss, sir? Sure. Okay, if we can bring Ms. Boone back up to the witness stand. Once she is seated, we can bring back in our panel. Go ahead and stand and bring back in our panel.
Hey, John. Hey, Sean.
Defense, you recognize the jury. Thank you all for being seated. Members of the jury, again, you could, once seated, raise your hands to confirm that you complied with the court's instructions during our last break. The record reflect all hands have been raised. Mr. Owens, you may continue with your inquiry, sir.
So I think we left off. You had called your ex-husband,
Yes.
right? After you called your ex-husband, what happened after that?
I ended up falling asleep.
Okay. Do you remember waking up the next morning? Did you sleep in?
Not intentionally.
Okay. But you didn't get up at 8 o'clock, did you? Did you wake up closer to noon?
I believe so, yes.
Did you check the time?
No.
Now, did you hear your phone ringing?
Yes, no.
And did you answer it right away?
No.
Do you know approximately how many times it rang before you answered it?
I believe the call was about 3 times.
Did you know who was calling?
I think it was my husband.
Why would he call?
To make sure that I was still on schedule to be the
3 that afternoon? He goes to school there close by?
Yes.
All right. When you woke up, did you stay in bed for a while? Tell me what happened.
I knew it was my ex-husband calling. I didn't answer right away. I figured that George was downstairs either drinking or looking for jobs, or may have just left. And so eventually I decided to get out of the bed and start aiming to go downstairs. I was motivated enough to go downstairs. And when I went downstairs, it was very quiet. So I had the understanding, I believed that he had left. And
Did you check to see if where would he be looking for a job?
usually on the couch, where my son's laptop and I usually share.
You already have the son's laptop? And TV was not working at this time? So he thought he would be in the living room on the laptop? He was not there? Where else did you look for it?
I looked on the back porch. I went through the front door to see if my car was there, and maybe he had taken my car. I checked the bathroom, and when I was checking the bathroom, I saw the suitcase, and I remembered about the night prior, and I unzipped the suitcase.
Let me stop you there. You said you were in the bathroom when you saw the suitcase, or coming out of the bathroom?
No, where our bathroom is, I would have to go to the bathroom here, and then when I turned around, I noticed the suitcase, and I remembered.
How did you feel when you saw the suitcase?
I don't think I've ever experienced it.
Describe it to me.
I can't describe the feeling. It was terror to a certain degree.
Sorry, say that again now.
It was terror to a certain degree. I just can't describe it in words.
So what did you do?
I immediately unzipped the suitcase, and I was screaming, George, 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 and I was shaking him, and I pulled him out, and I stretched him out flat, and then I began instantly trying to do CPR, and then was trying to look for a pulse or a breath or just anything, and was just screaming his name over and over and over again, and come on, George, and I continued CPR, and I continued CPR, and he was gurgling, and
What color was it?
what color was he?
At some point, you call your ex-husband.
Yes, when he started to gurgle, and I knew that my ex-husband is notorious for bringing my son over in very inopportune times when, of course, he's been drunk or doing things not appropriate for my son to see, and I just didn't know what to do. It was just a quick knee-jerk reaction. Ryan was kind of my go-to person because of my family being deceased, and I don't have anyone else that I can call. I just wanted to ensure that he would not bring my son over in the process of all of this.
So you called him.
I called him.
Did you ask him what to do? Or did you just tell him to come over?
I just told him to come over.
Did you tell him that you felt like George was dead?
Yes, I did.
And how far? You said it's 5 minutes from house to house? Did you call him back?
Yes, because it was so long, seconds or hours. Yes. I'm still doing CPR at the same time in the process of it. I'm doing CPR, I don't know how many times.
Did he get there?
Yes,
Did he walk in?
yes,
Did he walk out?
yes.
What did he tell you to do? What did you do?
I told 911.
Is that the story you heard here in this trial?
Yes.
Pero mentira.
Did you love George?
I to this day. George was a very real person. George was nice to me, gave me good days. George complimented me. George and I were two bodies with one soul.
Did you have that connection with your ex-husband? Was it close? George has some good traits, doesn't
Very much.
he? George has some bad traits. Did you drink too much? George drank too much. Tell the jury about George's drink.
If George was able to, he would drink from sunup to sundown. And having my son and trying to work and maintain a home and just have a life, a normal life, as best as I could, somehow that upset George. And because I had a certain element in my divorce settlement, at one point, it was from wine we could afford vodka, so a lot of times we would borrow my debit card and go back to the vodka, which is the big. And sometimes he would finish that all off on his own throughout an entire period, of a day into an evening. That's honestly where I thought that he was going to be that morning when I came downstairs, because he's notorious for just automatically being outside and drinking all the time.
Llegó a. No, we don't want to be here.
You said you had an alcohol problem. George has an alcohol problem.
Yes.
How did George's drinking adversely affect you?
It developed my ability to daily life was always okay. As it would be one good day, a day of survival, then it'd be another day where I had to go off of the important in the morning.
Why would you do that? Tell us his past. And it was drinking and
Approach.
No. Último. Cierto, no, último, de nuevo.
Objections overruled for now.
you already go to 3.5 years.
Yeah.
Is there times when he would get to a state of intoxication where he would get violent against you?
Yes. As long as you show us the state for please.
¿Qué pasó?
Two photographs.
Yes.
Did so injuries to your body?
Yes.
Were those injuries caused by George Torres?
Yes.
Those photographs appear in accurate of injuries you sustained at the hands of George Torres?
On this occurrence, yes.
Do you remember this occurrence?
I don't so often.
You don't remember a specific date? Would you remember that shoot?
Specifically, to go to his brother's house, his brothers and his.
Sustained.
You know what happened to, did George cause these injuries?
Yes.
Did, would y'all both document it?
What was pre-marked as P will be received into evidence without objection as Defense Exhibit 2. Mr. J, would you be so kind? Thank you.
Allora,
I wanted to take my dogs for a walk and get off of the back road. Yes. And he was upset that I would rather go walk my dog than sit there in the rain. So he slapped my thigh as hard as he possibly could and said, "You're not going anywhere." And it was very my bad.
Got a fair amount of anticipation of the woman you said, George, I'd like that.
What was pre-marked as Q will be received into evidence without objection as Defense 3. You may.
George was very drunk, and I wanted to leave, and he's notorious for taking my car keys and putting them around his neck, and my phone in his crotch area, telling me to come get it. And I really wanted to leave because of how drunk, and I knew the escalation of his anger. I didn't want to be there when it was it. So I tried to take my keys from around him because he kept taunting me to take my keys, come get your keys. And so I attempted to go and get my keys. And so he ended up getting a butcher knife. And I had an opportunity to call Brian to come and help me, to come get me. And of course, he brings my son with him. And so I'm in the parking lot asking Brian to please help me get my car keys away from him. And there's neighbors, and it's a scene at this point. And George comes to the doorway of my townhome wielding the butcher knife, saying that no one's going to take her fucking keys. No one's going to fucking come into this house. He's waving the butcher knife. And I walked up to him, and I just wanted to leave. And my little son, who was, I believe, 7 or 8 at the time, was screaming, give mommy her keys, give mommy her keys, let her leave. Ryan was even trying to negotiate with me, saying, please, no, she'll come back, just let her leave. So I went up to try and take the keys from him, and he was pulling on them, and I ended up pulling harder, and he pulled them back again to try to pull me in the house, and I pulled them harder, and it ripped my finger. And at one point, I had lost the fingernail, and it's been my